Good morning, Brad. Welcome back to America Daily.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
You are a former CIA operations officer with 25 years of experience. And since your retirement, you have been speaking and writing about issues surrounding security in the United States. You also One of the topics that you touched upon was in our last interview was the Hillary Clinton email scandal. And you also wrote an article about it in the Epoch Times called The Clinton Email Scandal and Corruption at the FBI DOJ. And I'm going to let you talk about that. But before you do, I'd like you to tell our listeners about the organization that you started called Americans for Intelligence Reform.
Certainly, yes. Americans for Intelligence Reform, I have founded, and part of the reason was I just didn't see anyone out there really kind of, it sounds odd for a CIA guy to say maybe, but fighting for truth and justice. There just wasn't any of that out there taking place on the intelligence end of things. And intelligence, the intelligence community, the IC, as everyone likes to refer to it now, is just so bloated, and there's so many agencies involved, and yet our capability has continued to deteriorate and go down, and that really is one of the cornerstones of national security. And to have a strong national security, you really have to have intelligence. And now my focus is more on the human end of things, but human tends to drive the bus for a lot of issues that are other types of intelligence collections. So it tends to kind of spread outward. And so it does impact on a lot of different areas. So I bring all of that, try to bring all of that into the fold. And particularly what we saw take place under former CIA Director John Brennan, where he essentially just disbanded operations, and it no longer exists as a separate entity within the CIA. It's just sort of a mishmash of stuff now. And having seen people get killed, and just the degradation in capabilities and the degradation in our overall national security as a result, somebody has to start standing up and fighting back on these issues, and we haven't seen it. So at Americans for Intelligence Reform, we're pushing for administrative changes within the rules that help reinforce national security. We're looking for legislative changes, anything that we can do, bringing information to the public's eye that helps change the dialogue. And we've had tremendous success so far in particularly those issues. So continuing to chug away, still a new organization, and still growing and going through the different stages to become more and more effective. But so far, so good. Enjoying it a great deal.
Now, this topic of Hillary Clinton sending classified documents through her personal email server is still kind of relevant today in light of the fact that Attorney General William Barr is conducting his own investigation into whether or not the FBI and DOJ acted appropriately or lawfully in their investigation. And you had said that the fact that a classified document could be sent from one personal email server to another is clearly a crime. And yet, when Hillary Clinton sent classified documents from her server to Anthony Weiner's server, it was not considered to be a crime by James Comey, the FBI director. And in fact, he didn't investigate it further. So can you tell us what it was that James Comey reported about the emails that he discovered, and why did he decide that it was not a crime? And also, one more thing. Also, the FBI agent who originally investigated Anthony Weiner had a little bit of a different report in terms of the number of emails. So also tell us what he said.
Okay, let me touch on that, and then I'll kind of go back and lay the table for how all of this has progressed to where we find ourselves. So, yes, now James Comey in his speech just leading into the elections for the 2016 presidential election, which is where Hillary lost and President Trump won, she had this problem had been fomenting for quite a little while. So James Comey had looked into it, and as information has surfaced over the last couple of years, he felt that for Hillary to be able to legitimately win, which everybody thought going into the election that Hillary is going to win. I mean, everybody, even conservative friends of mine that are extremely knowledgeable on the Hill, thought that Hillary was going to win, and win fairly handily. So Comey was faced with a little bit of a dilemma. If he did nothing then he would be accused of future cover-up, and cover-up of illegal activities on the part of Hillary leading into the election would call into question the legitimacy of her presidency. So I think he took a look at the whole thing. Of course, I don't think there's any question that James Comey looked at this thinking Hillary was going to win, and that he looked upon that as a positive. So faced with that situation, he did this famous speech that everybody talks about, as I say, just leading into the 2016 elections. And what he said there was he gave kind of a litany of all of these things that Hillary Clinton had done wrong, and then finished up by saying, but no prosecutor in the United States would consider indicting anyone based on these things, and it wasn't on purpose, and there was no intent, and so it's okay. Well, one thing on that too, of course, is intent is completely irrelevant. It's the same thing. I like to go back to the metaphor of shooting somebody in the head, because it's so black and white as to being wrong. You can shoot somebody in the head on purpose, and you can shoot somebody in the head on accident. No matter how you slice it, those things are illegal. That's just not a legal behavior to do. And it's precisely the same thing with having classified documents at home. It doesn't matter what your intent was. It's still illegal. Now, you may be faced with lesser crimes, and it might depend on so on if you were unaware of it, but it's still a crime. Somebody's in trouble over that. So Comey came out with this speech and saying, nothing was much wrong. He knew that there were a lot of classified documents out, which they had known for a long time because of WikiLeaks. And so he in his comments, he said, it was kind of a nebulous, hazy sort of phraseology. So you have to sort of put the pieces together and look at what he was saying. But he talked about there were, in fact, classified documents on there. There were different chains of classified documents, meaning on the same subject, a bunch of discussion of that same subject, but multiple documents, some of which were CIA, which now that's very interesting in and of itself. Others were not. So clearly there was a lot of classified State Department things on there, none of which were marked classified, which we'll come back to that. And that's basically been one of Hillary's defenses all along. Well, there was nothing marked classified at the time. So that's what Comey came out and said. Now, if you sort of calculate in what Comey was talking about, he was talking about maybe 2,500, 3,000 classified documents. Now, all of those were already illegal, but there's a couple layers of kind of going back. We'll start with the shortest one first. So if you go back, where this came out and began to be a problem at the second level was with the Anthony Weiner laptop. And now I think everyone remembers he was a former congressman that got in trouble with sexting over his phone with underage girls. So he got into trouble that way. So it was a sex crime investigation initially with the Anthony Weiner laptop. Now, of course, he was the husband of Huma Abedin, who was the main assistant to Hillary Clinton, which, by the way, Huma Abedin has a very dedicated, strong connection to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an interesting aspect of this as well. Her mother actually was the editor for a magazine that was a Muslim Brotherhood magazine, supported all of their efforts and philosophy, and she worked there for her mother for years, so came out of that background. So that's interesting in and of itself. I don't know that anyone's ever looked closely at that, but so you have all these classified documents that appear on the Anthony Weiner laptop, initially uncovered by the New York police because of the sex crime activities that apparently Anthony Weiner was spent some time in jail for, and that laptop initially made its way out to Seattle because that was one of the offices where they did technical exploitation. So you have an FBI agent out there who's doing the exploitation of this computer, looking for sex crime activities on there, of which he did find some, which was part of Anthony Weiner's problem. Also, what he found was a whole bunch of classified documents that he already knew about before James Comey gave his speech. And the FBI IG, now IG for everyone is the Inspector General's office. All of the federal agencies have an IG office, Inspector General, and they basically do internal investigations, looking at what the agency has done right or wrong and so on. So the FBI IG does an investigation of this initial step. And one of the things, and they didn't make any determination, they just investigated it. Now, I've read the report. They went out and talked to the FBI agent out in Seattle who did this exploitation of the laptop. And in their interview with him, he was saying James Comey misled the American people as to the number of classified documents on that computer, and that he was off by a factor of 10. That was that guy's comment. And that he was, the FBI IG was saying that that guy was very paranoid because he was afraid that he was going to get in trouble because he did not have a clearance and had these many thousands of classified documents on this laptop, and that was under his control. And then also that guy made a very interesting comment too. He said there was a whole other area every bit as large, if not larger, of memory on that same laptop that he did not open to exploit. And that there's likely an equal number of classified documents there. So again, back to Comey, 2,500 to 3,000 classified documents, add a zero at the end, and now suddenly we're talking about 25 or 30,000 classified documents. Now that laptop was then moved to Quantico, which is the main location just south of Washington, D.C., here in Virginia, where the FBI does its forensic work. So that computer goes there. There was another FBI IG inspection, and they made a comment that it looks like there was probably, they mince their words. They don't just come out and say stuff. So you have to kind of read between the lines and figure out what they're saying. So there was probably an equal number of classified documents in that other section of memory, but they don't know how many were duplicates and blah, 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 blah. So they start to mince all of their words. So, but now we're talking, maybe 60,000 classified documents, something like that are out there. Some of which we know for a fact, even from what James Comey said, are CIA classified documents. So now let's go back, and how did we kind of evolve to end up here, and how is this related to everything else? And it's a very interesting story. Hillary Clinton had a long history of having problems. I mean, she'd had legal problem after legal problem after legal problem, and often surrounding essentially money. And of course, if you listen to them speak publicly, Hillary was one of the people that often complained about they were poor. And she wrote in her book that when they left the White House, they were penniless, and all of these sorts of things. So now, from her perspective, poor means they weren't, I think, like billionaires. And for all of us, they weren't poor. I mean, they had money coming in and could go speak and get paid money and those sorts of things. So, but they weren't comfortable to what her standard was. And of course, the friends that she hung out with were all fairly wealthy. So Obama wins, she loses. We'll go back to the 2008 election, and she was given, she obviously wasn't the running mate. Biden was. So she was given her choice of what she wanted. And the next most powerful position for an incoming administration is Secretary of State. And that's what she chose. Everyone knew that the idea was for her to launch her own candidacy for president once again, following Obama's presidency. So that was the best position to springboard from, which that logic has been used many times by many people, including, I would argue, today, that same logic is being implemented. So 2009, she assumes the office of Secretary of State and is there through 2013. Now, very quickly on the heels of that, we see WikiLeaks pop open, following those years. Now, there were a number of problems that took place during that period of time that are just very, very interesting. So WikiLeaks all of a sudden has all of these emails and classified documents from Hillary Clinton, and in the thousands out there. And I've looked through all of those too, and there are some very interesting little tidbits in it. And that also continues to be chipped at by FOIA requests and so on. So more and more things are coming out, and we've had a lot of big hits just lately on information finally coming forth since the Obama administration is gone. So as more and more comes out of all of this, we see the true depth of problems of the information that was included in that. So they were faced with this WikiLeaks problem, and how do you come up with why those things are out there? Hatched out of that, I think now people like Rush Limbaugh and a lot of people argue that under the circumstances, they were faced with a terrible problem because they knew that some of these emails were very damning. Some of the classified information was very damning that was on there.
So how does a classified document get onto someone's personal email server?
Yeah, this is extraordinarily interesting, and it's a process that there's really only one way to accomplish, and this is something that as far as I know, I'm the only one kind of describing this in any detail in a public forum. But a classified computer system, and all of these classified documents go out by computer on a interagency basis. They don't carry paper over except for extraordinary circumstances. So as we've noted, I mean, we're talking 60,000 classified documents. So these weren't hand carried around anywhere. These were all on a classified computer system. We already know that some of these documents were CIA and from other agencies, from what James Comey said. So we know how this has to have been done. So they were coming to Hillary Clinton's computer, and Hillary Clinton, as is very common in the State Department, doesn't really like that. She doesn't, she's old fashioned, isn't a computer literate person, as she herself often admits. So she doesn't really like reading traffic on there. She wants paper and things like that. So I think for convenience is how all this originally involved. But physically what had to happen, it's a closed computer system. And understand, you can't put your thumb drive into a classified computer system. They don't have those drives built in because they don't want you downloading stuff onto a thumb drive and walking out with it. So there is no way to connect into that system to download the information. Interesting aspect, the FBI IG report on this stuff calls all that spillage. Very interesting use of terms, spillage. Spilling is something done accidentally, right? You spill a glass of water. You don't, dump it out onto the table on purpose. So they're calling it spillage, but each one of those classified documents then has to be printed off on paper. There's a record of who prints what paper. Then on the classifications on each classified document are located in the header and footer that gives all of the directives, is where it came from, who controls it, how it's classified, top secret, secret, whatever. And those documents then had to have that header and footer cut off or folded back under so you couldn't see it, and then put face down on a scanner, scanned. Then you had an unclassified version of this document that was put on people's personal computers. There is no, it has to be a precise variation of that scenario. There's no other way to have that take place. So this was a wholesale event taking place with a lot of people involved. This isn't an hour, every other week to get this done. So what did also we see out of this? We saw a group of 8 or 9 people when this got originally looked at by none other than Peter Strzok, the famous Peter Strzok, who was the head of FBI CI, Counterintelligence Section, which handles the intelligence issues, not the criminal division. So he brings in these people, they get questioned all of this, they provide some testimony, and this done in conjunction with DOJ, and they're all given immunity, including the lawyer that erased 33,000, famously, those 33,000 documents of Hillary Clinton's. All of those people got immunity. So this is one of those questions where AG Barr is looking at all this stuff and saying, well, wait a minute, this is clearly illegal activity. The guys that can tell you about the illegal activity and probably did it all were given immunity. I mean, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, how does all that play out? And he's going back to the FBI, as we've all heard in his interviews, and saying, well, how did this happen? And he's not getting adequate answers using his words. So we all know that this is part of the problem, and the investigation into these things has been expanding. They've rented more office space and hired more people to start digging into more and more of this. So just a fascinating turn of how this is going. And the evolution, which I was mentioning earlier, was as these WikiLeaks documents were out there, which now they were saying, what the Clinton campaign said was this is all a Russian hack. 2 main things on that. We pretty much know that that's not true, that there wasn't, the Russians may have gotten their hands on this stuff eventually too, but the origin of the information was apparently Seth Rich. And we saw WikiLeaks come out, Julian Assange, who runs WikiLeaks, heads WikiLeaks. Seth Rich was the guy that got murdered on a downtown street, bullet to the back of the head, wasn't robbed or anything, had an expensive watch and his wallet and all of those things on his body when it was found. And he basically confirmed that Seth Rich was the source of those things. Seth Rich was a Democratic Party, employee, and he worked there as a young man. So Julian Assange came out and said, we're offering a reward to anyone that can give us information that leads to the conviction of whoever did this murder. And they said, so are you saying that was your source? And he goes, no, that's not my source. And so the question was, well, why are you giving out this reward? And he said, well, we have to protect our sources. So, I mean, essentially, he said Seth Rich was the source. Okay, taking that at face value, I mean, that makes sense. Now, another aspect of that doesn't mean that Hillary Clinton's computer wasn't hacked. We also learned from Louis Gohmert, the congressman from Texas, Republican congressman from Texas. He found out that, in fact, it was, and that there was a little piece of programming embedded in that. So every time anyone sent or received a email into that system, a copy of it was sent off, like a blind copy was sent off to some location. Where was that location? It was for a Chinese company. So, and we all know the Chinese intelligence uses Chinese private companies for intelligence purposes. So it was the Chinese hacking it all along. As I said, Louis Gohmert was that. Now, there was some FBI saying, oh, well, gee, that's not true. We have no evidence of that. But again, they were parsing their words. And so, yeah, okay, they didn't have evidence of it. They knew that bug was in there sending out stuff, but, that's not proof. Okay, it's not proof. But we know that that's what happened. So it was the Chinese hacking, Chinese working with Iran, and sharing this information, and it would not have been a problem for then Russia to get their hands on it. So, kind of looking at how this originated and looking at it from Hillary Clinton's perspective, she had a problem. And as I was kind of alluding to earlier, a lot of people, including Rush Limbaugh, a lot of people have alluded to the fact that all of this was well before the 2016 elections, well before Trump was going to run. And so, what were they doing? And I think that was where you saw the origin, the kernel of growth of this whole thing, because they needed to be able to have a scapegoat. So the scapegoat was always going to be the Republicans, and it just happened that Trump stepped into it by winning the election. And so that was just how you saw this whole thing evolve. They had to have somebody. They showed Russian collusion because I think they picked Russia because they knew it wasn't the Russians, so it was easier to blame them than the Chinese. Now, again, I do want to take a little side issue here, too, that's very, very important to the American people that everyone should be aware of. And one of the real questions I have to see how far AG Barr will go with this, Attorney General Barr, U.S. Attorney General Barr. And that is that during that period, Hillary assumed office in 2009, was there to 2013. So in 2010 and 2011, after she had been using this private server for a couple of years, and a lot of this information was being filtered in there, suddenly the CIA's entire program, remember, we know CIA documents were included in what she got. The CIA program in China was all wrapped up. Now, reports have varied, but the minimum report I've seen is that 19 Chinese people working as spies for the United States, working for the CIA against China, that those 19 people were dragged out of their office, brought out in the front lawn of wherever they were working, and executed right there, shot. Other reports say as many as 30. So somewhere between 19 and 30 Chinese spies for the CIA were executed in China. Now, a body of reporting came out of that was leaked by the CIA, former CIA officials. What they said was that it was based on this communications program that had been used in the Middle East very successfully, but it wasn't up to standard to operate against the Chinese, and yet it was brought over and they used it anyway. And that was how the Chinese figured it out. Now, okay, is that feasible? I suppose it is, but there's a number of problems. Being an old hand at this, so you had everybody in China that you communicated with all in the same communications program? I mean, that would have been unheard of. I would say then, me looking at it, if I were an administration person, I would look at that and go, well, everybody in leadership needs to be fired for incompetence. That was stupid. We never did that before. Why are you doing it now? And especially in this time of heightened problems, not lessened problems. So a number of issues there, but prove to me that those things were easily being discussed in the emails that Hillary Clinton was getting. Prove to me that wasn't the source. We know the Chinese had those documents. Prove to me that those weren't leaked in those documents, and that Hillary Clinton's incompetence on this isn't the cause of the deaths of those 30 people, 19 to 30 people. Now, We know also that Iran is essentially a surrogate of China and do a lot of the things they do at China's behest, including this latest dust up of them, increasing more problems with the United States. A lot of that is being driven by China. Iran also had roughly 30 people in different places that were all supposedly working for the CIA get arrested and mostly shot. So you had maybe 30 people there and 30 people in China all get picked up during the same time period, all get executed, and all get executed for spying for the United States. Now, Hillary Clinton clearly was following all this stuff. Clearly, that's the type of thing that would have been included in her emails, these classified documents coming into her system to be looked at. And yet, no investigation of this has ever been done. So again, I say to the U.S. government and the intelligence community is on the hook to dig into these, and they have not done it. So how do you argue there's no corruption, no political corruption within the system, within DOJ, within FBI, within the intelligence community? How do you argue there's no corruption there when something so blatant as this, where maybe as many as 60 people were executed, dead? How do you justify not even looking at that? And you cannot say that they're not dead because of Hillary Clinton, because you don't know. Nobody's investigated it. So it has to be looked at. Now, AG Barr, I think, is clearly seeing all of this stuff. And I think he's a law and order man. I think he believes that the reputation of the FBI and DOJ needs to be upheld. And he sees all of this corruption as dragging them down. And a lot of people are looking at them saying, how do you argue there's no political corruption? And AG Barr himself has said he wants to look to make sure that nobody had their thumb on the scale of justice. That was his quote. So it clearly is looking at all of these sorts of things. He's not a stupid man. He sees all of this stuff. He goes to the FBI and DOJ and says, okay, why? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? And doesn't get answers. And so what happens? His investigation of this whole thing expands. So I think this is sort of the evolution of it, and why we saw Trump get involved, who really was, just as we've seen from the Mueller report, was nobody involved. But this all now is returning to the Hillary Clinton emails. And we still have that body of maybe 60,000 classified documents on Anthony Weiner's laptop. Now, I hope that the FBI people there that have this at Quantico have not destroyed any of those things. I mean, that would be a certainly just a blatant obstruction type crime. I just can't imagine that happening, but you never know. As all of that floats together, if it's looked at by anybody who's honest, I just don't see how Hillary Clinton and those people that got immunity, all of them aren't going to end up in trouble. By the way, a quick note on that. The immunity deal lasts as long as there was no sort of collusion between the DOJ officials who made the deal with them and them. If there was any sort of collusion kind of covering up illegal activity, then that immunity deal is dead and gone. And the DOJ people who made the deal are probably in very serious trouble. So I think that's really where we find ourselves today. I think as this sort of marches forward, those sorts of deals are going to blow up in their face. It's going to be looked at. It's going to be found to be collusion. And all those documents out there, they're going to start going back and looking at them. And let me say, 60,000 classified documents, even if that's half, the real number is half, 30,000 classified documents. Let's even, cut it down even further, 10,000 classified documents. 10,000 classified documents is a lot of documents. There is no way out of that body of 10,000 classified documents that there isn't important national security related information that's been revealed to the Chinese. It just can't happen. So that, the after action damage report remains to be done, and to see what all was given out to those Chinese. And again, our national security, we have to have that, because we need to know what the Chinese know out of all of this stuff so that we can change our procedures, or now it's probably too late to save any of the people's lives if they were revealed, but all of those things that the Chinese are aware of out of those leaks needs to be looked at so we can do the damage assessment and fix what is still fixable, which is probably not much, but at least we would know the origin of these things. And if those guys were mentioned in Iran and China, I don't know. I mean, that's when you have people die as a result of these things. Again, it doesn't matter what Hillary Clinton's intentions were. And if all of this is true, which it appears to be, but if it's all true, Hillary's intentions were probably what she says. It was a matter of convenience for her. And she was roaring around and she had her little BlackBerry and wanted to read it all consolidated into one BlackBerry, all of the unclassified and classified condensed down into one thing. And to get the classified onto this unclassified BlackBerry, that was the procedure I previously described was how it had to be done. So I believe that. I think that what she did do was just, with complete disregard to any other factors, for her convenience, wanted a BlackBerry. Now, completely irrelevant in a legal sense, because it's still illegal for her to have taken classified documents and put it on an unclassified system. But I think that was the arrogance that we saw. I think that's the problems that will come out. It remains to be seen, but it's under investigation. So we'll see what AG Barr does with it and what he comes up with. As an intelligence guy, I think the intelligence that we're seeing is very conclusive, but that's not the legal standard of proof we need for court. So that's what AG Barr is working on. And I think there was so much of a paper trail created because of how this was intended to be used that they can't go back and bury it all, because to have these legal proceedings go forward where they were going to try to prove that Russian collusion with whoever the Republican candidate was and all of those, they needed to establish all this paper trail. So I think that's where we find ourselves right at this moment. And like I said, you see a lot of people, sort of the legal eagle groups here in Washington, D.C., doing a lot of FOIA requests, and a lot of this stuff pops out. It's just hit the news in the last few days about that little personal lawyer getting an immunity deal after she destroyed the 33,000 classified documents and those sorts of things. So it's constantly evolving and changing. A lot of it hitting public sphere, and a lot of it probably going into the hoppers there with the Department of Justice investigation being headed by AG Barr. So it's really evolving quickly, and I think there'll be a lot of changes, especially in the next 30 days.
Now, in terms of the 8 or 9 people who you said got immunity, how was it that they were able to carry out this task of transferring all of those classified documents to Hillary Clinton's personal server without getting caught at the time?
Well, the boss, it was being done at State Department, and it had to be done in Hillary's executive offices there as Secretary of State. She was the boss, so who's to say? Everybody else, anywhere else in State Department, was below that. And it's you an employee of the State Department. First of all, they were philosophically aligned with Hillary Clinton. The State Department is probably the most leftist government agency there is within the United States government, and that's saying a lot, by the way. There's a lot of competition for that title, and so they were philosophically aligned and wouldn't have been looking to make problems for Hillary to begin with. But all of that would have taken place in Hillary's executive offices. Most people would not have seen it or been aware until they got emails from Hillary Clinton, which, by the way, is part of President Obama's problems now, because from the very beginning, he was exchanging emails with Hillary Clinton. They would send each other information and so on. Obama's emails, when they received, showed the Hillary Clinton government .gov email address. So he knew right away. But of course, what he said publicly was that oh, well, I learned when you all learned, is when it hit the public arena and was reported in the press. That's when I found out about it. But like I said, there was years of track record of this email address that he'd been communicating with Hillary. So they tried to rephrase it. He had his publicity guys come out and say, well, it was because of this and that and the other. He wasn't aware of all of this happening and da 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 da. So I think that's going to be a minor problem for President Obama. We'll see how that carries forward, how deeply involved he was. I think most people, even AG Barr, would be very hesitant to dig too much to try to look at putting a former president of the United States in jail. And I don't see that going forward. But certainly that's the type of thing where I think it behooves President Obama to keep his head down and kind of stay out of the limelight and sort of be a calm, quiet former president making the occasional public appearance and that sort of thing, just to not draw a lot of attention to himself. The old adage, don't get into a foxhole anybody crazier than yourself. And I think that's where Obama's head needs to be right now, is to not bring too much attention to himself. So we'll see how all that plays out. But I think the body of evidence that's starting to really pile up on these emails and Hillary and so on is pretty damning. So I think she's got real problems. Like I said, I mean, classified documents on Anthony Weiner's laptop is black and white. There is no discussion. That's illegal. You cannot have classified documents at home. If I had classified documents at home and got caught, I would have gone to jail, and which I never brought classified documents home. But people have gotten in a lot of trouble. Let's not forget Petraeus, who was a former, he was head of the 101st Airborne and very successful within the Army, and then moved over to be director of the CIA. And what he got in trouble for later was having one classified document at home and locked in his desk drawer that he showed to, as it turns out, his biographer was his girlfriend. But so he showed her that classified document. She had a clearance. That's the people don't point that out very often. But he had a clearance. She had a clearance. He had one document at home locked in a desk drawer, which is not, it has to be in a properly configured safe for it to be safe, secure storage, which he would have been able to do in his position. And most directors of the CIA have that sort of stuff. So it wouldn't have been a big deal if he'd just had it in a safe. So he shows it to his girlfriend, and that was it. That was the crime. And he was thrown under the bus for all of that. And that was all he did. One classified document at home that he showed to somebody with a clearance. Now, this is way, way, way beyond the pale of any of that. So, again, very interesting. As I said, I think over the next month, we're going to see quite a little bit pop up more and more on this. And when that investigation gets done, I think there'll be people go to jail. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe not, but we'll see.
Well, Attorney General Barr has not actually officially reopened the investigation into the Hillary Clinton scandal. Is that right?
Correct.
But there is another organization called Judicial Watch that is conducting its own investigation under the Freedom of Information Act. And they've gotten permission from a federal judge to actually interview a number of senior officials in the State Department, as well as Hillary Clinton and her chief of staff. So what information do you think we'll learn from those interviews? And my final question is, what are your thoughts about how this will ultimately play out?
Yes, Judicial Watch has done a fantastic job. And in fact, they're the ones that brought out this through FOIA, through the Freedom of Information Act, brought out this latest about the immunity deal that the Hillary Clinton's lawyer got, who erased the 33,000, those famous 33,000 documents, classified, documents. We don't know if they're classified. So yeah, they've been pretty aggressive. And I'd have to say, really hats off to Judicial Watch. They're really the ones leading the charge in so many ways on going after this information. They've really done a great job of it. And each time they get this information, now a lot of that stuff has been redacted, but now with my background, I looked at redacted documents, and mostly what I see redacted isn't very important because I know what has to be there. And having done thousands of those sorts of documents myself, you just know what has to be in there. So these guys, now I haven't talked to them about that specifically, but I'm assuming they've got people like myself that can look at this and say, well, look at this, look at this, look at this. And they're all lawyers. Many of them are lawyers there too. So they're not dummies. They're seeing, and as they get each batch of stuff, that leads to other batches of stuff. It's one of those things that snowballs, and we're kind of midway in that process, I would say. Now they've gotten their last batch from this one FOIA request that was big, that was 364 documents or something. I don't remember the number, but it was hundreds of documents that came out in this last batch. Out of that was this immunity deal of the 33,000 documents. So it's a drip of all of this information coming out. And I can tell you for a fact, they're going back and already asking for more stuff. And there's other FOIA requests in play, and they're after it. I mean, no dog has ever had a tighter grip on a bone than these guys have on this issue. So Judicial Watch is really doing fantastic. My read on this is that every single time any little bit of information comes out that exposes more and more and more of it, it gets worse and worse and worse for Hillary. And now you've seen the people within the Democratic Party circle the wagons, trying to fend this off as best as they can. But it's not effective. they don't have many tactics left because you can pretty much figure they're really guilty, and so they're trying to fend this off by going, oh, you're only doing it because it's political and you're living in the past, and Hillary was years ago, and the old Hillary adage, which has always been her tactic, is what difference does it make now if they were out on a Saturday night or if they planned it for a month? What difference does it make now is the rally cry that you have of the Democrats now. This is all the past. Forget it. It doesn't matter. But all of these things, the Benghazi thing, all of this is coming out, and it's all interrelated. You have the same people, and we haven't even talked about Hillary's campaign manager, John Podesta. But again, there's a lot of things there. I mean, the pedophilia ring, there's been a lot of reporting on it. I mean, it's not an area that I've spent a lot of time looking at it, but there's a tremendous amount of smoke. So is there fire there? Now, of course, it's denied vehemently, but what are they going to say? I mean, any guilty person going into this problem is going to go, oh, well, I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. It was that guy over there. You're only saying this because it's political or whatever. They're not going to go, yeah, I did it all. I'm guilty. So you can't listen to what they say on it because it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. They're going to say they're not guilty whether they're guilty or not. So this whole thing just has to continue to grind forward. But as every little bit of it comes out, if you see the whole Benghazi thing looked at, tremendous amounts of information covered up on that, tremendous amount. And I'm within the community of that sort of thing. And the operators and intelligence people that are the field operations guys, these people that were left to die in Benghazi, including the ambassador, that paper trail that's behind it of them asking for additional security. Well, what's all that going to lead you to? All that's going to go back, if it's ever really looked at in depth, it's still going to go back to Hillary Clinton's private server. It's still going to show all that stuff. Now, the ambassador wasn't sending back those requests to Hillary's server. He was sending it back through official channels, asking the security office within the State Department to do this. Now, I know a lot of the guys in the security office at State Department. They would have been totally gung-ho to provide security in Benghazi. So that got stopped somewhere, because somewhere up the food chain, it got stopped. Now, a lot of people point out that there were some political reasons why they didn't want to do it from the very top, all of those things. Now, hard to say because it hasn't been looked at closely yet. That information isn't out there, but that's how it appears, that from the executive office, the Secretary of State office, it was quashed. But like I say, I guarantee you it was going up the chain going, yeah, we've got this budget. Let's get it out there. We can get these people. Let's get Marines. Let's get walls. State Department security knows the drill. I mean, build a wall that's far enough away from the embassy that, an explosion, a truck bomb or something doesn't kill everybody in the embassy. They know how high the wall has to be. They know how many Marine security guards have to be there. They know all that stuff. They've been doing it for decades. So that had to get quashed by somebody. So let's go see who. And never forget, the ambassador who was killed there, his family has said they don't want him used politically. But at some point, you have to look at this and go, there's greater responsibility to national security here than just your personal wishes on the memory of this ambassador. And let's not forget that ambassador, if you can search and find all these photographs. I've watched the videos of what happened to him. And after he was murdered at the embassy, he was carried around, on a pole up his rectum, naked around the streets for a couple hours. Well, that's an outrage. Go look at the videos if you have any doubts. They're still out there. They're easy to find. It's a disgusting, horrible thing to have to watch. But if there's any doubts, go look it up. That was how this man was handled after he was killed. Where's the reporting on that? Where's the outrage on that? Why would that be covered up? I'm sorry for the family very much that this man was murdered so horribly. But there's a greater responsibility here, and to have that have been done to a U.S. ambassador is more than a democratic liberal political issue. There's more there at play. And I think it's just an outrage that the memory of what truly happened there has been covered up. And the way those people were abandoned, loyal citizens of the United States of America trying to provide security to that embassy, were abandoned. They were just left to die. And famously, the stories, I mean, you see these guys, they made movies with this and wrote books. And he was saying one of the guys on the roof was lasing the different places, trying to get air support to come in and take these things out. It was their only chance because they were surrounded and clearly didn't have enough firepower to hold it off. So that was their only chance. And he exposed himself by doing this, and that was how that guy got killed. So it's as if the real story comes out more and more and is investigated, like I said, all that is going to lead you back to the core of it, and all of that's always going to show this Hillary Clinton private server being used. So if anything gets through the cracks, any one of these things that are being looked at, and goes back to the core of where this all originated, the whole thing's going to blow up. So I think you see why the Democrats have circled the wagons, because they know if this explodes, they're finished for a decade or two. They're just finished. They're going to lose a lot of local elections, state level elections, and federal elections. They're just going to be in real trouble. So I think that's why you see them doing this. And it's just the corruption that exists here in Washington, D.C., and I'm certainly not going to argue that it's never existed before. I mean, we know that Washington, D.C. is not the cleanest place on earth for corruption. But I think now it's reached a new level that really is beyond the pale. So I hope the whole thing does explode. And while I personally am not going to shed a tear if Democrats and liberalism is hurt by all of this, the real goal here is, and that all patriots, whether from the left or right, should adhere to on this, is we have to have a system where the judicial system works and is fair to all of the American people, and not the political elites here in Washington, D.C. having one set of rules and all of us having another set of rules. And like I say, I cannot forgive Hillary Clinton for all those classified documents. I created, wrote, handled classified documents for decades, and protected those things vigorously. And Hillary Clinton just spits on all of that with this thing. Now, again, that remains to be proven that she was the one that ordered that done and so on. But somebody did spit on it, because we know those classified documents are there. So that needs to be tracked down, and whoever's guilty punished. And if it's indeed Hillary, it's conceivable, that she didn't know. She just said, "I want everything on my BlackBerry, make it happen," and turned and walked away. And so maybe she didn't really realize all of that stuff. I'm not sure that would save her in a legal sense. Probably it would still be illegal. Probably she'd still be in legal jeopardy over the thing and jail time, probably. But, again, not a lawyer, not my bailiwick. We'll see if the prosecutors are going to have to go through that. But the legal system needs to work here. And as soon as that dam breaks, they're all in. And by the way, let me say, here on the Hill, I'm near all of this and down quite often, and meeting and talking and just crossing paths with many of these people. And I would say everybody knows what's coming. Everybody sees the storm on the horizon. Everybody knows this is not going to go away. Everybody knows it's not going to be covered up. It's just a question of how bad will it be and what can be done to mitigate it. And that's what you see the Democrats doing right now. This is damage control, mitigation to try and stop it. And you see a lot of encouragement coming out of Republicans and conservatives, which I would separate the two. But you see a lot of encouragement coming out of that. Now, some of the Republicans are afraid of this too, because some of them are going to probably end up being implicated. And that's not it's not the Freedom Caucus conservative batch. It's the, mainstream traditional, kind of rhino Republicans that are going to be involved in that. And they're sort of the Washington elite that you've seen the Democrats and Republicans join to be part of for a long time in Washington, D.C. So I think you see resistance to moving forward with this out of them as well. So it's going to boil down to individuals like Attorney General Barr. Does he have the huevos to go forward? And it appears that he does. He appears to be a fairly courageous man, where I think what we saw out of Jeff Sessions was precisely the opposite. I think that was a man greatly lacking in any personal courage, and that's why he did so little when he was there, and why he was forced out of office. He just didn't have the wherewithal to move forward on any of these things, and he just wanted to tamp it down and let the elites do what they do and continue as they were. So that's my vision of the future for this. I think a crack will form in the dam. Once it breaks, all this stuff is going to start to come out. There's no stopping it at that point.
Brad Johnson, thank you for joining America Daily.
Thank you so much for having me again. I appreciate it.